Hello and welcome to the International Code Council Region 1 and Region 1 Radio Show. My name is Tim Spears and I'm the host of Region 1 Radio. Region 1 was established in 2014 and we're made up of 3 states, California, Hawaii, and Nevada. That includes 32 ICC chapters. We're dedicated to excellence in education and engagement to promote a safer environment by bringing individuals together. These videos and podcast series were designed to highlight individuals in the chapters that make up our region, and we want to share their experiences with you. Today on the show, I'm excited. We have Sara Yerkes with the International Code Council. She is the Senior Vice President of Government Relations. Hi, Sara, and welcome to ICC Region 1 Radio. How are you today?
I am well, Tim. Thank you. And thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you and your listeners. It's an honor for me. So thank you again for allowing me this time with you.
Well, and I'm sure many of you already know, if you follow ICC, the International Code Council and some of their press releases, Sara is actually going to be departing ICC very, very soon. And I'm glad to have her and be able to get her to sit for an episode before she leaves. So this is kind of an exciting time.
Yeah, it's true, Tim. So after almost 21 years with ICC, I'm about to transition into a much, much smaller role as a consultant, but for very, very limited events and functions I'm going to carry on through next year. So I won't be completely gone, but I'll no longer be the Senior VP of Government Relations.
Well, I know that those are going to be big shoes to fill, whoever does come into this organization. Sara is very well respected. I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there listening to this that are very sad to see you go. I think that you've definitely left your mark on, ICC and really the code development and really code enforcement throughout the country and really internationally as well. So with that being said, can you share with us a little bit about your background and your role within ICC?
I will be happy to do that. So, as you said, I'm about to retire from the International Code Council as the first and only Senior Vice President of Government Relations. I was recruited in 2001 by ICC, and I created the Government Relations Department, and I've been building it since. At the time when ICC approached me, I was the Director of Government Affairs for the National Fire Protection Association, where I handled their federal activities. So I've been with ICC since prior to the consolidation, and ICC has given me a tremendous opportunity to create the Government Relations Department and all the programs that reside within the department.
Wow. To be able to really create it from scratch, so to speak, and build that department. And so your role within NFPA was transferable, it sounds like, because you were already doing a lot of that work before coming to ICC. Is that correct?
With NFPA, I represented the association at the federal level. So I was concentrated on federal activities with the executive and congressional branches of the federal government. But I learned so much about working with legislators and decision makers at that level that really helped me when I came to ICC. And I realized that the code adoptions were going to be a state and local activity. And I quickly geared into that mindset, working with the local governments and traveling around the country, getting to know the players, the processes used throughout the country to adopt our codes. So it was... I had a good background and really helped me create a federal presence also for ICC. Within FPA, I had the pleasure and the honor of working on many big pieces of legislation, like the Hotel Motel Fire Sprinkler Act. You may recall the DuPont Plaza hotel fire that killed over 90 people. And that legislation was a big deal for the fire service. We worked with the legislators to include a carrot and the stick approach. Basically, the legislation said if you are a federal traveling public and you want to stay at hotels, motels, you must stay at motels and hotels that are sprinklered. So that was really a great motivation for the hotel chains to install their sprinklers. I was also privileged to be part of the creation of the Congressional Fire Services Institute. This is an entity that works with the fire service groups to carry messages to the Hill, unified messages to help promote and advocate for fire service and emergency responders' requests, needs, the Fire Safe Act, and many other pieces of legislation. So my background also working with the American with Disabilities Act back in the 90s, and all these big pieces of legislation really gave me a great foundation on how to be successful at working legislation, convincing and advocating for the issues that I was representing. With ICC, then when I came to ICC, I brought a lot of that background with me and a lot of my relationships with the folks I'd been working with for 20 years in DC to the ICC, and continued then to develop those relationships, but now representing the International Code Council.
Okay.
And
so
as you know, Tim, if I may, as you know, the fire service is a big component of ICC. A lot of people don't realize that because we don't have fire on our name, but the fire code that we put out is a predominant fire code in the country, and the urban wildland fire code and many other fire-related emergency response areas that ICC is engaged in. So fire service is a big component of our organization.
Yeah, I do, I've been in multiple agencies that have used anywhere from the Life Safety Code to the International Fire Code. And I will say that the International Fire Code is definitely one of those documents that it spans, as I was talking to Chief Mike O'Brien a couple weeks ago, it spans more than just fire-related life safety. It's more, anywhere from hazardous materials to emergency planning. He mentioned, the tornadoes in in Kentucky and the importance of training and some of those things as we talk about emergency preparedness and emergency planning. And I really do think that the International Fire Code does help shape that. And I do think that, really across the country, a lot of us utilize the International Fire Code. I know that there are some NFPA states, so to speak. And maybe we can talk about the code wars here in California a bit. I know that was going back and forth. That predates me a bit. I wasn't in California at that time, but one question I did have. So when you graduated college, how did you, I think that, for me, I always find it very interesting, from somebody that graduated college and now is helping shape, federal policy and local policy. How did you get involved, from graduating college into that type of arena and that type of field?
Totally by coincidence. Totally, because I majored in foreign languages in college, and my desire at the time was to become an interpreter with one of the World Banks or International Monetary Fund. But when I came to DC, the first question that I was asked when I was interviewing for a job is how fast I could type, and I was a miserable typist. And back then they asked women those questions. I don't know if they asked men, but they asked me, and I was like, if I have to speed up my typing skills, I'm going to starve to death, so I really need a job. So I went into this employment agency, and they said, oh, we have this part-time job that sounds perfect for you. The guy is so nice, and they will like to see you today if you can make it. So I went to the interview, and the interview was with Jack Gerard, who was the Washington representative for the National Fire Protection Association. And he had been hired. He was a retired fire chief from Los Angeles, from Orange County. He was on the NFPA board of directors. From the NFPA board of directors, they hired him as the Washington rep. And he hired me on the spot. They wanted him to start a research foundation for NFPA, which we did. We created the NFPA's research foundation. And we did that for a couple of years. And the job was never part-time. In 1985, the man who was handling the congressional and federal affairs for NFPA retired. And so Jack said, this is perfect for you. And he threw me in there and said, hey, go do it. And I was very fortunate to have him as a great mentor who trusted me to go out and represent NFPA. maybe 25 years old, and it was a big deal to represent one of the biggest fire service organizations in DC. So I'll forever be grateful that I had that opportunity with NFPA. And then also with ICC, another great model code, the biggest model code developer in the world. And I was given all these opportunities, and I just embraced all the responsibility I could and took it from there. So I've been in this industry, fire and building community, and the codes and standards community since 1982. So I've seen a lot of things happen in the time that I've been around, including seeing the I-codes adopted in all 50 states by the U.S. territories and the federal agencies, and then also seeing some of the external interest in our codes from other countries. So it's been a real privilege. But Tim, as I told you, I came out of college thinking I was going to be an interpreter, and here I am in government relations. So.
Yeah, and that's one of those things is we, as we're going through this process, we identify that there are a lot of things, our experiences, definitely, I know for me, when I graduated college, I went to college with a degree in healthcare. I came out, I was an occupational therapy assistant. I remember bits and pieces of that, but I will say that helped shape me maybe into being a better fire code official, because I had one-on-ones a lot of times with some of my patients. And so I could have those conversations. So that maybe helped me be a little bit more talkative, especially in this role, being on this podcast. So, and being able to have those discussions. So you talked about having that mentor when you started with NFPA. Mm-hmm. Have you had any other notable experiences and mentors that have really kind of shaped you throughout your career? Yes,
I've had a few. My current boss, my CEO, Dominic Sims, he and I started at ICC at about the same time. I was hired by Bill Tangy, and then Dom was on the board of directors of SBCCI, one of our legacy organizations, and Bill Tangy hired him. So Dom and I have seen this organization grow to what it is today, and it's been a real privilege for me to work alongside Dominic and for Dominic. He has been just a tremendous person, a visionary, and it's wonderful when you work with people that are innovative, creative, that are not afraid to take risks. And Dom is like that, and I am like that as well. So I think together we really have a vision for an organization that met all the needs of the code professionals, building and fire, plumbing, mechanical, all the disciplines in our world. It's a complicated world. As you know, it's not as easy as it seems from the outside looking in. There's so many moving parts. But definitely Jack Gerard at NFPA and then Dominic here, my two bosses, have been tremendous mentors and supporters.
Yeah, and I think that those people that help kind of shape and be able to mentor and support throughout your career. I mean, I have a lot of, I always call them my phone of friends. Those are those people that things get difficult, that I can, at least I can use them as a sounding board. So I'm not working just in my own silo, and they help, kind of shape me, throughout the course of my carear, which has been good. Now you mentioned,
and Tim, if I may,
go ahead. Sorry.
On this topic, my first conference, when I came on board with ICC, I was so impressed with the code officials around the country. I mean, there is not a group that is more dedicated and committed to public safety than our members, who gave of their own time, their own vacation to travel to code hearings, to sit in committees, to work on the codes. What a tremendous dedication from these individuals. So seeing that kind of dedication, that's a great motivator for anyone who wants to succeed. And I wanted to succeed for them, for me, and for them as well, not just for myself professionally, for the organization, but also for the members. And I was constantly reminded that it's all about the members, make the members happy, everything else will fall in place. That's what Dominic likes to say, and it's so true.
Yeah, I do think that is one of those things that ICC has always been good about, and I've always had a good, positive interaction. And I will tell you, Susan Dowdy, she has been one of our regional reps here in the state of California, and outstanding resource. And everybody that I've ever had to work with and either attended a class or a conference, it's been one of those things that's been very outstanding. And yeah, I can't speak highly enough about Susan. She has been one person that I rely on very frequently, and I know others as well have relied on her as throughout what they do as well.
You have one of the best out there, and I'm very lucky. I have a team of experts, loyal, hardworking individuals. They're all like that, totally dedicated to their jobs, to the members. Susan she's not just a tremendously intelligent and effective GR manager. She's also a very kind and nice person.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. Everybody that I've talked to on this podcast, her name comes up very frequently with all the guests that I've had on here, which has been great. Now, you talked about building consensus, especially with the congressional process and being part of that, initial development of the congressional, was it Congressional Fire Service Council, right?
Institute. CFSI.
Institute,
mm-hmm.
Sorry. Yeah. And so building that consensus, and I always think going to policymakers with a consensus is always extremely important, because I think that you get more done that way. Especially like code development is a good example of how we do that. You build the consensus, and then hopefully you're able to kind of, continue to develop the codes as they need to be. But in that relationship building with government stakeholders, what are some successes and some difficulties that you've seen in trying to build that coalition and that consensus?
Well, when you serve a community that has very diverse interests, we work with builders, with energy advocates, with engineers and architects, and the code enforcement personnel, administrators, state legislators, and decision makers. The challenge is bringing the group together to at least agree on the fundamentals, right? If we have a common goal, and the goal is public safety, a safe environment, and so you have to be patient. And my opinion, as I learned from early on, it's better to bring all the stakeholders together and know exactly where everybody stands than to be surprised when you go to a public hearing and then so-and-so says something that completely shocks the other partners and stakeholders. And this is how we did it in California. You talked about the code wars. We had a very strong coalition in Sacramento. Bob Raymer, one of my favorite people in the world, and Kurt Kochnick and Matt Wheeler, and those guys are tremendous. LIUNA, the Labor's International, Mike Quiroz and their representatives. And we would always get together before each public meeting, and we would talk about who was going to say what, where we stood on issues. And sometimes, CBIA didn't agree with ICC, and we always agreed, okay, we're going to be respectful, and if we can't agree on 100%, what can we compromise on? What is going to make this happen? So where do I need to be, and where do you give, where do you take? And so that's how we worked. CFSI taught me that early on, because when we used to go to the Hill to talk to the legislators about fire service related issues, you'd have the fire marshals, you'd have the fire chiefs representing management, you have the firefighters representing the unions, you have NFPA representing public education and the codes and standards. And many times we were not in agreement, and we would bicker in front of the legislators, which they hated. And they actually told us this, Kurt Weldon and Bill Pascrell, and they told us, go away, get your act together, come back with a united voice. And the way we figured this is going to happen is by setting up an entity that can be a neutral, not favor one or another. And so I am a firm believer in coalitions. Anywhere in the country where there's an ICC president and an ICC representative, there needs to be a coalition that brings in all the parties, and that we work together on everything. And like I said, Tim, sometimes we're not all in agreement, but if there's respect for each other and honesty, then I think we get a lot more done. And the proof is the codes got adopted in all 50 states. So, and they're model codes. They're not meant to be taken in their entirety. We understand the nature of the beast. They're meant to be adapted. And we always support amending the codes up, never amending down. But we also respect the authority of the jurisdiction to adapt the codes. And so it's that understanding that you have to work with the stakeholders. You have to work with the jurisdictions and be flexible. You know, what we want is for everybody to be current as possible on their building regulations.
Yeah, you know, and I think you brought up a good point, is making sure to get everybody, you know, in the same room. That was one thing that when I talked to Chief O'Brien. He was the chair. I think he is now you know, going out or going off of the chair position for FCAC, and he was mentioning how it's very important to, as people come in with code development, get everybody in the room, because, like you mentioned, CBIA, they're going to have a much different perspective maybe on a code proposal than maybe a code enforcement official will have a, you know, perspective on something. And what are those trade-offs, and how do we get there? And if we come in with a concept, how can we ultimately get to, you know, a working product that we can bring to the floor and have those discussions? And I think that that's a very similar, you know, discussion. What you mentioned is building those coalitions, and how do we build those coalitions, and how can we make sure that those coalitions are, those bonds and those coalitions are withstand, you know, a lot of this back and forth, because those things do happen. And it's really important to be able to have that those strong bonds, especially when things get a little bit more difficult.
Well, one perfect example of a coalition started by competitors. Back a few years ago, we started a coalition for current safety codes. It was founded by ICC and FPA. And the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. It's a tremendous association. It's always been very supportive of codes. And here we are, two competing organizations, but we're united in the goal that we want jurisdictions to be safe. We support updating the codes, the standards for building and fire safety. We don't get into the nitty gritty. We don't get into arguments. It should be the IFC or the NFPA 1. That we deal separately. But what we do together is we approach the stakeholders in each state, and we identify who do we have. ICC has a rep, and FPA has a rep. NEMA has industry members. We pull in these people together, form these coalitions with the state and local representatives, because look, Tim, me coming from Washington, D.C. to talk to somebody in Alabama is not going to carry the same weight as somebody from Alabama who actually votes for those members in the legislature. So using the local influence is the best approach, in my opinion. Sometimes you have to go in because they want to hear from the organizations, you know, from ICC or other organizations, and we're there. But we always try to work the issues in the most, you know, friendlier way, more locally homegrown way possible, because that's what they're going to pay attention to.
Yeah, you know, like you just mentioned, that coalition between NFPA and ICC, and really kind of looking more at what the mission of both organizations are. And, you know, how do we better help the membership in both? I mean, you know, being part of ICC, I also have membership with NFPA, because it's important. Both organizations are vitally important to what I do every day. I mean, I reference NFPA standards on a very frequent basis, and, you know, through the codes, and I rely on their interpretations. And so, you know, for me, it's kind of a sum of many parts. And I know that, like, here in California, it is homegrown. A lot of times we're working, you know, directly with the State Fire Marshal's office to help shape code proposals that go in front of the Building Standards Commission. You know, I actually sit on the Northern California Fire Prevention Officers Building and Fire Code Advisory Committee, so I work a lot with Crystal in the State Fire Marshal's office, and I know that she works very diligently on bringing proposals. Her and Chief Anderson bringing code proposals ahead to the Building Standards Commission for those building standards as part of the State Fire Marshal's office package. And And so, and they do, I mean, they get a lot of input, from many of us as it relates back to, what's happening in our jurisdictions. And I find that process, and I find those friendships and those bonds to be very important, to, kind of help and shape the overall, code. And kind of a lot of times what we see in California gets shaped or gets maybe transferred outside of California to some other organizations, because we are very dynamic, and we are, I always tell people that, California's code is, I remember working in Colorado and seeing the California State Fire Marshal's office stamp on a tent. And I thought, well, at least I know that this thing's going to be flame retardant, or it was held to a standard, that was very stringent at the time. So, yeah. And seeing those things in this state kind of transfer out has always been very, very important to me.
Well, I have a lot of respect for the process in California. I was actively engaged in the adoption of the codes there, and I've seen the process at work. It's a very transparent process. The way California amends Title 24, I think it's one of the best processes in the country. And as a matter of fact, when I've been asked to give examples of good systems, I usually use California, Virginia. The Carolinas have good process. New York. Some states overcomplicate, which I wish we could help them streamline, but sometimes people don't like to change their process. They're married to that process and they want to stick with it. But yeah, look, we reference many NFPA standards in our codes, and we pay a royalty to use the NFPA 70, the electrical code, which is the only electrical code in the country. So we're partners as well. And we work together, coalitions at the national level. But hey, given an opportunity to compete for the fire code in a state, we're going to compete. But we're not going after each other anymore. Right. We're kind of pretty satisfied with the way things are, and everybody in their own corner and behaving themselves. So that's been very good. It's really good to see that kind of relationship and partnership between the organizations.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Now, you kind of talked about the consolidation into the iCode. So many of us know, ICC, really hasn't been around forever. And so it was consolidated, bringing many different codes together. And through that consolidation, I know that was quite a major undertaking. But as we take a look at that consolidation, what are some of the greatest changes you've seen since that consolidation? Because there has been a lot of, many years that, through that process, and we're quite I think 2001. And so we're really removed from that initial consolidation. Yeah,
that's one of my, should I say, fears, that people will forget how ICC came about. For those of us who are retiring and we are taking our institutional knowledge with us, I don't want folks to forget what got us here, because it was historical. The three competing organizations founded ICC in 1994. And the first thing they did was come up with one set of national model codes. And so they took the best of the three regional codes to create the iCodes. And as you know, they've been now every 3 years they're updated. And so we're now working on the 2024 editions of the codes. It was historical in the sense that these were three competing businesses, three competing organizations that said, for the sake of public safety, for the sake of our members, we are going to unite. We're going to consolidate into one organization, putting aside all business interests, individual business interests, for the good of consistency and uniformity in building regulations. Because as you can imagine, Tim, the different organizations, the builders, the building owners, the architects, the code officials, they had to participate in three different code development processes. And going from California to New York, to Carolina, to Virginia, different codes, just a mixed match of regulations. So the biggest thing that ICC provided and continues to provide is that consistency and uniformity in the format of the codes, so that professionals know exactly where to find accessibility, where to find structural, mechanical. They know exactly what chapters to go to and find what they need. I think it has facilitated and still have the flexibility of being model codes meant to be adapted because, California has its own specific needs with seismic, Florida with the wind provisions, and different provisions throughout the country. So you don't want to burden the jurisdictions with requirements that don't apply to them, although ICC does not look kindly when the codes are amended down, because we look at the base code as what the members have already said. This is the base of what's required to put up a safe home, a safe building, a safe structure. So in 2003, when we consolidated in Texas, when the papers were signed, that was a big deal. And since then, the organization has continued to evolve because, as you know, building and fire, the building code and the fire code are not the same little books that they were decades ago. No. They're huge legal, technical documents, and it's never going to go back to that simple version that a lot of people still remember very fondly. And I've been told, hey, I could put it in my shirt pocket. It's like, not anymore. You need to carry these books now around, or now the digital transformation that we're doing, putting everything electronically is simplifying all that. But ICC has made tremendous progress in how it produces the resources for the building and fire community, from starting with CDP access to allow participation. People that couldn't travel, couldn't afford to be away from their jobs for long periods of time, can now do it from the comfort of their own offices in front of their computers, and they can participate. There's no excuse they can't say, well, I can't participate, or I don't have the time, or I don't have the budget to travel. And we need that continued interaction with from the members to ICC so that we can continue developing the best model building codes in the world. So did I answer your question? Because you asked.
You did.
Me. Okay.
Yeah. So you talked about the institutional knowledge and being that far removed from that consolidation and kind of how that was brought together. I will say that in that consolidation, you mentioned, architects and engineers going from one state to the next may not, always have the information associated with whatever given building code or fire code that is there. And so I will say that ICC, you mentioned, brings that consistency and uniformity to overall, because I will say for us, I mean, I'm getting people submitting plans and performance-based designs from Georgia in California, and, knowing the California fire code, because California does, we do amend the code, but typically we make it more stringent because, as you mentioned, the I codes are the minimum. And I think that some people forget about that when I have those conversations. They always think that the fire and building codes are very burdensome. Then I remind them that this is really only the minimum.
Right.
This is the minimum standard that was developed by code professionals across the country, really across the world. And so that's what's got us here. And this is a consensus document.
Yes.
And so as we amend the code, we amend it for local, and so as we mentioned, the California, adoption process. And so even local jurisdictions can even amend the code a little bit further to address some of those topographical, geographical, and climatic things. So anywhere from, like, here in California, we've got the beach. We've got the Central Valley, which I'm in, and then now the mountains that are receiving feet of snow. And you wouldn't typically think about that in the great state of California, but we are a very interesting microcosm of different regions that you kind of have to do that. You have to take a look at that. And so you mentioned having the code and being able to put it in your pocket. So when I first began code enforcement, it was 2004, 2005, and we had what was called Chapter 5. So I worked I was an Iowa Deputy State Fire Marshal for the first 6 years of my career, and we had Chapter 5. And so Chapter 5 was like 5 pages of just basic fire code requirements. And in was it 2006 or 2008? I think it was 2008. We went to the 2006 edition of the IFC, and I will say that that definitely changed a lot of things. And you mentioned this being a legal document. It is a legal document, and it is very, beneficial in the sense of it provides administrative provisions as well, that I think that are vitally important to what we do. And I think having the admin code as well as kind of a piece to that definitely helps as we talk about code enforcement, for most of us code professionals. So now I do have a question. You mentioned the virtual process and how ICC has really opened it up. So this year, COVID really kind of helped reshape a lot of what we did. We had the initial committee action hearings; those were virtual, but then the public comment hearings were in person in Pittsburgh. Moving forward, what do you think that we'll see maybe as we talk about some of these code development processes, and will we see a virtual component as we move forward, do you think?
Well, I think you are going to see some things that have happened because of COVID continue on, because people have gotten accustomed to those, the flexibility, for example, of having either a hybrid meeting. You can participate virtually or you can be in person. I think a lot of organizations are looking into that because some people still don't want to travel. Other people are just dying to get out and seeing people because they've been tired of being secluded. I think the digital transformation and the CDP access and all the virtual committee meetings, that will probably continue. And I hope I think our members have been very fast in embracing the technologies they have to, the virtual inspections and so on. In my department, we immediately started looking at what resources we needed to provide the members so they could address some of the challenges that they were facing with this pandemic. How could restaurants continue to stay in business if they weren't allowed to have but so many people inside, or not even have people inside? They had to expand outdoors. How do you do it safely and so on? And one of my biggest concerns was with winter approaching right in the 2020, when we started seeing what was happening, was making sure that people weren't going to be doing dangerous things with these temporary structures. So we started putting out all kinds of briefing papers and created a COVID page. And but I think, Tim, what I hope the members will always, and I know you probably don't think about this because you're so concerned and focused on your local areas, right? You're in California, you think about California. But think about this, you're developing the model codes that are used throughout the country and outside the United States. The Department of Defense uses the I-codes to build military installations around the world. The State Department builds embassies and ambassadorial residences on the American codes. So we are developing these model codes. Your intellect, your skills, your knowledge, your expertise that you bring to the table is not just for California. It's for the world. So it's a big deal. And I think the more we open those opportunities electronically, digitally, the better, because then you're going to have a lot more participation. We've seen with Surfside, for example, when we immediately took action to start developing a draft non-mandatory guide for the maintenance and inspections of existing buildings. We had a professor from Germany come to our West Palm Beach panel discussion and we used a lot of his information, a lot of his knowledge to develop our own guide. So we're learning from country to country. We're sharing knowledge and experience globally, and that's going to continue. You cannot close your frontiers. You can't close and say this belongs here only in the United States. It's worldwide. The pandemic task force that we created, we have meetings at all odd hours so that we can accommodate people from Australia, New Zealand, and the Middle East, and so on. So, I think COVID brought some challenges, but it also brought some opportunities. And I think you're going to see a lot more flexibility. The employers are going to be willing to be more flexible with their employees. Employees are much more interested in quality of life, balance of life, now more than ever. I see this, especially young families, right, that have now been challenged to the max with having kids at home learning virtually, computers in every room, 5 members of a family, each person on a computer, all these things. And I feel bad for the families that can't afford this. But thankfully, there have been some resources given to folks so they can meet some of these challenges. But I do think the workplace is going to look different. Even here at ICC, we're looking at a hybrid work schedule where you spend 2 days in the office and 3 days working remotely. So there's a lot more flexibility. There'll be a lot more office sharing. What's it going to do to office space? I don't know. There's a lot of office buildings in Washington, D.C. that are not fully occupied anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So there's quite a bit. And, one thing at ICC, again, the vision of Dominic back in 2019, because we've been a virtual organization, Tim, from the beginning, I've managed a department that has most of my staff have been in home offices. So very early on, I had to learn how to manage people that were not in my presence, that I couldn't see every day. And how do you become a good manager and be there for your staff and provide them the resources and support they need when you can't see them at the water fountain, so to speak. Dominic insisted that we learn teams, that we were doing a lot of conference calls, but he wanted us to be able to see each other and be more interactive with each other. So when COVID hit, we were already ahead of the curve because we were already doing Teams meetings and meeting like that virtually. But I think Teams, Zooms, WebEx, everything. It's now in the books. That's how business is going to be conducted.
Yeah, and I will say that I think that most of us have been very adaptable. I think we all had a crash course on many things virtual, anywhere from digital plan review to virtual inspections to how. And you mentioned just even businesses. How do we keep businesses open? And it was one of those things that for me when the governor came out and said, "Hey, we're going to shut everything down for the next 2 weeks." And I'm thinking, oh no, what am I going to do? Because I just started in my current department. I'd been there 2 weeks and we're shutting everything down. And I didn't have a lot of institutional knowledge. And, so it was a crash course for a lot of us. And so, but I will say that employee wise, my employees were very adaptable and we were still able to kind of meet the needs of contractors and businesses and really help kind of foster, some safety in some of these trying times. And how do we get there? And I will say that, ICC has been one of those organizations. You mentioned the COVID response page on the website. I frequented that a lot. I sat in on a lot of those webinars just to identify the different things that were going to be available. I will say that I know ICC and probably yourself included did a lot of work on the CARES Act and having money associated with the CARES Act and then also the American Recovery Act. I was able to pull funds from that to be able to help really be able to continue to provide service virtually. We did a lot of work through virtual plan review already, but then we were having some troubles with file sharing because of the file sizes were too large. And how do we do that? So we ordered new equipment and everybody got new laptops and said, here's your laptop. Now you get to work from home. And they're like, oh, really? I get to work from home? Yeah. Because usually it was so rigid within the, government sphere that everybody showed up to work at 8:00 and you don't go home till 5. And now I will say that there's been a lot more flexibility in people working from home. And I will tell you that it has helped me be able to meet more of the need for many of the customers that we deal with on a pretty frequent basis. So I will say, COVID has definitely helped increase that flexibility in a lot of our organizations. And I think moving forward, we'll continue to see that.
Oh yeah, I definitely think we're working more than we've ever worked before. And what I found most challenging, I'm a people's person. I love interacting with people, and I missed the travel. I didn't miss my commute because I had a horrible commute from where I live to Washington, D.C. 36 miles. It took me 2 hours, sometimes 2 hours and 15 minutes. On my worst day, 2.5 hours. It was hell.
Wow.
But I missed the office, the camaraderie, seeing my colleagues, seeing the members traveling visiting with people, being in front of the computer from morning to evening, and then there was nothing else to do. What are you going to do? You're isolated. You can't go do any fun stuff. So, well, let's do a little bit more work. Let's open up the computer and see what's going on at work. And so it just became, to me, is this what the rest of my life is going to be like? Life is going before me, and I'm stuck here. My company is a computer. And I just, that, and I've heard from other people my age bracket that have said they retired looking forward to travel, and COVID stole away so many opportunities for them to enjoy what they had been looking forward to, traveling and visiting family and their kids and grandkids, and they couldn't do it. So it was very hard. But Tim, you mentioned some of the federal legislation. Yes, we worked very hard to get funding in a lot of the pieces of legislation that President Biden signed, and even the former president, a lot of the FEMA policies, HUD money, the infrastructure money, and the jobs assistance plan, all that has happened. We did webinars, and we're going to continue providing more assistance to our members. So you know how to access the funding, because it's not easy to apply for some of those grants. Those federal applications can be complicated. Yep. So we want to help, we want to assist, because we want the building and fire departments to access the funding for what they need. There's funding there for personnel, for staffing, for resources, for training, certification, all that. So that's very important. You continue to monitor the ICC website and communications, because there will be more coming out. As a matter of fact, the person who's taking my position as Senior VP of Government Relations is Gabe Mazur. And he's been the guy behind a lot of this, working with the Hill, with the members of Congress, making sure that we have monies in there for our members and stakeholders to tap. So I'm very proud of the work he's done, and hopefully you all will take advantage of those resources and tap them.
Yeah, I think that you guys did outstanding work, and I will say that it was greatly appreciated on my end, especially identifying that we are essential. So many people tried to identify what are essential employees during this time frame, and understanding that really code enforcement and building safety is still an essential service. And I'm just glad to see that. And also too, like I said, those monies and being able to have those dollars to tap into, and knowing, like, using your resources and the resources from ICC to be able to go to my policymakers and say, hey, I know that CARES Act money is coming, and because that's coming, these are some of those things. And so I utilized a lot of the language on the website from ICC to be able to at least socialize that with people within my city, to be able to ask for some money. Now, granted, I wasn't asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars, but enough to be able to continue to allow me to continue to providing a adequate service for my community. And that was immensely beneficial. So what happened in Washington, D.C. definitely benefited me, almost the furthest, west part of the country here in the Central Valley of California. And I'm sure that there's a lot of us that have similar stories.
Yeah. Now, and any questions you have, or you need more details or information, don't hesitate to call the Government Relations Department. And obviously, I won't be the key person managing those inquiries, but Gabe, he's top notch, knows everything about those pieces of legislation that were signed into law, and so. Don't give up. And I do hope members apply, because it would be a terrible thing to waste the efforts that were put into getting that money, and those pieces of legislation go unused.
Yes, I 100% agree. Now, I think you hit on one of the biggest challenges with COVID, especially for many of us that are very type A personalities, that work is always available to us, and so we can pull up our laptops. How did you try to work in some more work-life balance? I will say that I stress this. I tried to stress it as much to my team as I possibly could. And when I was receiving emails from them at like 8, 9 o'clock at night, I said, okay, well, I'm not going to respond to that until first thing in the morning, but we need to talk about this balance because I know it's available. I know that you have it available, but spend time with your family. That's important too. So how did you adjust to that? And kind of what are some of those things that you tried to do to be able to help address that work-life balance?
I really like this question because I have always placed a lot of importance in ensuring my colleagues, my team was well cared for, that I was paying attention to how they were feeling, and not to be intrusive, not to be curious. I don't need to know details about their personal lives, but I always ask, how are you doing? Do you need anything? Are you doing okay? And if I sensed that someone was not having a very good time, maybe they were struggling a little bit, I'm seeing some emails that are concerning me, I'll reach out and see, how's everything? Do you need anything? And there was even a time when I had to ask our HR department to help me out because I was a bit concerned with one of my employees. And it was very brutal to some of the people that have for decades been out and about meeting the members. All of a sudden, they're secluded. They're in their home offices. And, my young executive assistant who lived in a studio apartment, imagine being, that's your workplace where you live, where you eat and sleep. And it was worried me. So I always made sure that they were taking time off, take vacation, even if it's just to disconnect. And we even thought about, okay, well, I'm going to make it mandatory. You need to disconnect for 24 hours. I don't want to hear from anybody. And, but they're stubborn like I am and loyal and dedicated. And we don't know when to quit. So it's like, you answer emails, you're attentive to people. And I insisted that they take vacation. And so did Dom and our COO, John Belsick, who's also our chief financial officer. They always made sure that we need to make sure staff are taking their time off, that they're just decompressing and disconnecting from the work environment. And even now, Dominic gave us from the 23rd until January 2nd off. Our office is closed on the 23rd, so he forced everybody to just take time off. So I always encourage and I make them. And I reprimanded them if they were on vacation and said, well, I'm on vacation, but I'm just like, I don't want to hear it, just disconnect. But I'm a bad one because I don't, that's one area where I don't seem to lead by example is, I work has been such an important part of my life. And it's just me and my husband. My son is out of the house and an adult and has his own life in California. So I didn't have the challenges that my other colleagues had with raising a family, a young family, and trying to juggle. That was hard too, Tim. Some of my colleagues who had young kids, husband and wife now both working from home with little toddlers who don't understand where mom and dad can't pay attention and play with them. So who's going to help these people and how they had to organize and shift their work schedules and cover for each other or get help from family or send the kids to Grammy and Grandpa or something. That was very challenging. But I think employers need to pay attention to, and managers and supervisors, if personnel need to pay attention to the staff so that they're not getting burned out. That was my biggest concern, the burnout. And most of them did okay, but I think a couple of us had the toughest time just disconnecting.
Yeah, I will say that I still, and I preach that they need to disconnect and have that work-life balance. But like you said, being attentive to the needs of your staff, and trying to continue to be there. Like, I get text messages from them on off work hours, and so I definitely want to be attentive to them, and like you said, always asking them how they're doing. I mean, that was one of the things we tried to implement, a daily call in, where we just did a daily conference call where we could check in and see how things were going. And since we've been back to the office, I've shifted to like a one-on-one session, because I think that is vitally important to reach out and have those discussions with your staff. And but that work-life balance is always going to be a big challenge, I think, now that we've shifted to this virtual realm. And how do we continue to balance that? And I will say that one of my staff members talked about taking her computer on vacation with her. She's going to Hawaii for 2 weeks and was going to take her computer. And I wasn't there for this conversation, but one of my other staff members was. And he says, you know what Tim would say about that? And he would not be really happy if you're going to take your computer with you on vacation. Disconnect, and we will take care of it when you get back. It's not that big of a deal. And I mean, life will still be here, and I promise we'll get through it. And nothing is, we are, we do our work in emergency services, but what we're going to deal with, we'll be able to get through it. We'll figure it out. We're very adaptable. So
that's true. And I did similar things. I always had standing calls with my direct reports, and then every 4 or 5 weeks with all hands, but I increased it during COVID. I said, no, I need to stay in closer contact with everybody. So we increased the number of calls. And I remind my colleagues, people are not robots. You've got to give them downtime, and even on the calls, it may some folks who are the type A personalities. Oh my goodness, we need to hear all this and talk about it. But look, somebody wants to talk about her cat, or somebody wants to tell me something that happened that has nothing to do with work, and they want to share. I'm there. I'll listen. Because this is also what makes a team. Is it's not just work. We're people, and some of us in my department, we're best friends. It's been like a family. We all get along. It's a very united department, very close knit department. We all my motto is one for all for one, like the Musketeers, one of my favorite movies. So and so that's what happens. You just give them time. Tell me what's going on today. What did you do that's fun? Did you do anything special this weekend? Tell me about your granddaughter. What's happening? Or the terrible storms that hit. Take time to find out how are you handling. How's your family dealing with all this? So
absolutely.
You talked about the Kentucky tornadoes. Our VP of Fire and Emergency Response, Carl Fippinger, spent a few days before Christmas in Kentucky with the FEMA MAT team, the Mitigation Assessment Team. But that's what you do, You're there for people and help people out.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of those things that many of us, as we take a look at it, how can we better support our employees, and what does that look like? And like you just mentioned, that a lot of us have a lot of friendships, and so when I look at my staff and you almost have to. I don't want to say it's a family, but it kind of is, right? Because you spend so much time with those individuals throughout the course of your life. And how can you make it so that way? You're not always going to see eye to eye like a family, right? But you're also going to have to, work together and, come together and be able to, continue to meet the needs of everybody else that you're working with. And that's been, one of the things that I've kind of tried to pride myself on, just be there to be able to provide them with that necessary support. So,
and that's how it's been for me at ICC. In my department, we've seen each other through losses, tremendous losses, and happy times. And ICC and our members have been a family. I think that's the one thing that really made me feel so in sync and aligned with the organization was the kindness, the dedication of the members, how we always seem to be there for each other. It doesn't matter if you're on good terms, speaking terms, close terms, but oh yeah, I know that person. That's terrible. We need to reach out and find out what we can do. I mean, it's that kind of caring, and it's real caring. It's not just BS. Oh yeah, well, okay, well, I'll ask how they're doing and go on. It's like people really care.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think that's important. Showing, as a supervisor, as a manager of people, that servant leadership is vitally important, especially nowadays. And how can you, be there to be able to help them meet their needs, especially when, as we talk about them working, to the wee hours of the evening, even when they don't realize that maybe they need the help. So interjecting that help as much as you can. So. Sara, you've been extremely, gracious with your time. I do have two more questions that I'd like to get, before you, go off into the sunset and retire or take a different role within ICC. I have one of the questions that I do want to ask is, what are some of the more notable projects that you've worked on throughout your career? You've covered like the consolidation of ICC, but what are some of those other notable projects that you've worked on throughout the course of your career?
I'm especially proud that I was part of the planning committees and groups that wrote the United States Standards Strategy, which is a guiding document for the code and standards development of national voluntary consensus standards. And that I was also involved and knew the writers, the creators of the OMBA 119, which is something we quote all the time, which is like our Bible, which sets the principles by which a governmental consensus process has to meet the consensus appeals process, transparency, inclusion, all those things, all those principles. I was very involved. So to have been part of that whole standards movement back in the 80s and 90s when the federal government started saying we need to give up all these military specs and government standards and use the private sector standards. So I was part of that private-public partnership, the creation of that public-private partnership where the private sector develops the model codes and standards, and then the public sector, the states and local entities and the federal agencies adopt and enforce them. So I'm very proud to have been part of that. And for me, the legacy of ICC, I know I said that before, but to have been part of the creation of this association and see its growth has been very rewarding. And the immense the relationships that I've created and have with my colleagues, the head of ES and IAS and the family of solutions of ICC, it's been a real privilege. I've worked with some amazing people. No, there cannot be more dedicated people. And then to see the codes. When I started, we were counting the jurisdictions, and I would send these little blurbs to our board of directors to keep the momentum going and the excitement. We had 30 adoptions this month, and we had 125 adoptions this month. And now we're up to so many adoptions, and now we have 10 states all covered in ICOs. And now we have 15 and 20 and 25 and then 50. And it was that, just the joy of seeing the accomplishments. And why? Because our members, we work the grassroots. We work the adoptions from the grassroots up. We rarely ever went to the top. We never went to the governor unless it was a special issue, but it was always what the members wanted. The members rallied behind us. So those were some of the things that I will always be so happy and proud to have been part of. And the programs that, I was very pleased when Dominic allowed me to institutionalize the high school technical training program, because I'm a firm believer that not every child is meant to go to a 4-year college. There are plenty of good jobs for kids that are more technical, industrial oriented. Many of our members came through vocational technical schools. I think those are very valid programs, should be supported. The military families program for military people transitioning from active service to retirement or separating from the military, bringing these people in as code professionals. They share a lot of the same qualities, respect for laws, organized, and so on. So those programs meant a lot to me. They're now under Safety 2.0. They're not under GR anymore. The creation of the fire service program in my department, my support for the fire service, and the support I got from the leadership of ICC to have a fire service VP and really engage with the fire service, and the PMG program and many of the other programs that I created, my involvement with Building Safety Month, which I managed for many years, and now it's managed by our communications department. But all those things and it's interesting because it always seems to go down to the members, right? It's whatever interaction I had with the members that really gave me a lot of pleasure, satisfaction, just serving the members, representing the members of ICC. It's been a privilege.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of things there, and I will say that somebody that is a frequent user and frequent visitor of the ICC webpage and an iCode user, all those are going to be a lasting legacy that I think many of us will continue to utilize for many, many years, if not decades and generations. And I think that for me, is getting to talk to somebody that has been on the ground floor of something like that is, I'm amazed that I'm even getting to talk to you, to be honest with you. I mean, that is one of those things that you have shaped a lot. And I think that it has been a very valuable, very valuable to all of us. And so I thank you. I really do, because I think if it wasn't for pioneers like you, we wouldn't be where we're at today. And I think that so many people forget that. And, some of us get into those silos, but if you take a look at all those things that you just mentioned, I will say that for me, I think that, you hit on the high school program. I think that is one of those things that should be highly touted. I think that I take a look at my son. He's 18 and he's working at Amazon right now. But I do think that he's more of a technical kid. He's more of, college wasn't for him. And so, but I do think that this would have benefited him. And so I think that that's something. And also to military families that are, people that are transitioning out of the military. And how do we capture those people? We are an aging workforce, but I will say that if there's ways that we can bring more people into it, but yeah, I think that you will leave a lasting legacy, especially, not just ICC, but also all the other things that you just mentioned. I think that those are all things that definitely other jurisdictions could build from. So I thank you for that.
And Tim, I hope you and others will continue supporting those programs and encouraging ICC to continue moving them forward. They're under Safety 2.0, as I mentioned, but a young person coming out of technical school, going into welding, carpentry, plumbing, making a great living and no college debt. That's a pretty good start in life.
Yeah, I will say that I'm still paying my student loans and I'm in my mid-40s. So,
and not to mention that selfishly, we want some of them to come into the code enforcement world because we need the building and fire officials to carry out enforce those codes. So.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I have one last question, and it's kind of a retrospective thing. As we take a look at your career, what are some of those important leadership lessons that you've learned during your career that you think other people should know about? We talked about kind of the response to COVID and being there to care for your staff, but what are some other those leadership lessons that you've learned throughout the course of your career?
Don't limit yourself. I have never limited myself. If my boss said we would like to do XYZ, I would do XYZ and look for what was ahead, always thinking ahead of what I could do more, because I hate when I do something and then my boss says, oh, but you could have done. I don't want to have that conversation. So if he wants me to do ABC, I'm going to do D, E, F, and continue on down the alphabet.
Right.
Supporting, I've always felt I'm busy. He's even busier than I am. My role is to make his life better, make him look good, because if I make my boss and my leadership look great, then I'm going to benefit from it. So it's not, the focus should not be on you. It should be on how you're going to make your leaders look, because then they in turn are going to take care of you. And being kind. Somebody once told me, you have to like the people you work with and you work for and enjoy their company. And I think there cannot be anything worse than working with people that you don't respect or you don't like. So I think having that satisfaction of enjoying the work you do with the people you really like to work with are going to make you even more successful. And learning from everybody. You don't know everything. And arrogance, being assertive and self-confident is one thing, but being arrogant is something else. And I've seen arrogant people that think they know everything and don't. So not being afraid to say, I don't know the answer to this, or I don't know how to accomplish this, but I know people who can help me. My mentor, Jack Gerard, told me one time, it's not how much you know, but who you know. You don't need to know everything, but if you know the right people, you can always depend on them to tell you what you need to know. So I think that's very important. The other thing I found in my career is that you learn from the young and the old. And you never know where a great idea is going to come from. So don't boo-hoo-hoo somebody that you think, well, what does he know or she know? She doesn't have the PhD or the law degree or this and that. Yeah, no. Good ideas come sometimes from very unusual people. And I have learned from the young professionals that I've hired to work with me. And I've heard people say, well, they're going to learn now how we do things here. And well, we're going to learn how to do things a different way, too, because they're bringing in a different perspective, a more creative approach. They're not afraid to be innovative. And, the worst thing a person can do is to settle and be comfortable in the position and assume that they are the indispensable. No one is indispensable. We're all replaceable. And I think if you work with that attitude that, you can be replaced any minute, and you represent your members well and be kind and do everything, you're going to be a great leader. But don't think that young people are not going to teach you something, because they are. Yeah, everybody has an ability to keep learning, and that's what you should not forget. Keep learning. And I never closed my mind, and I never limited myself. If my boss wanted something done, I would be the first one to say, don't know if I can do it, but we're going to try. We'll give it a shot. I hate naysayers. I hate people that are downers, bad attitudes. Don't bring your mood to work. Just leave your bad attitude at home, because here at work, we have to be positive and creative and support each other and not bring each other down. Those to me are good qualities a leader needs, and especially one that supervises people.
Yeah, I think that you hit on one of probably the key aspects that so many of us forget, is to be kind and to be nice. Alan Brunacini, the former fire chief of the city of Phoenix, always said, be nice, right? That was his moniker. And I try to really stress that upon my staff, just dealing and being empathetic, right? Yeah. You mentioned it as well, as being empathetic and, helping them, to, not to be a naysayer, not to be somebody that's negative, but being empathetic to the people that you're dealing with. And I will say that empathy goes a long way, especially nowadays.
And Tim, I always tell my colleagues, don't ever make it personal. Don't ever make it personal. It's not personal. Nope. If we're competing, it's one code against another. You talk about the benefits of this code. You talk about what we have to offer. You never criticize the person on the other side, because you never know where you're going to end up. Look, I came from NFPA to ICC. We've had people come from IATML to ICC. ICC people go to IATML. It's a small community. We move around. Be respectful, be kind, and if you are kind and respectful and trustworthy, don't ever lie. The last thing you want to do is to lie to anybody, because then your credibility is shot and people won't trust you anymore. But if you're always truthful and honest, people will respect you. And the one thing I always tell my colleagues is don't neglect the person at the front desk, because when you walk into a legislator's office, that person sitting at that reception desk could be the future chief of staff or the future member of Congress. You never know. So always be kind and respectful to those people, and, acknowledge them. And Tim, on a personal note, and I said this about the kindness and the loyalty I feel towards ICC and our members. When my older son died in 2005, I received letters from people I'd never laid eyes on, members of ICC who felt the need to write to me to tell me how sorry they were for my loss. My colleagues who were there for me, my boss, and the fight. Look, the National Fire Academy, where the USFA hosts the Fallen Firefighters Memorial, which I used to attend when I worked for NFPA, they included me in the counseling for the mothers and wives who lost children, husbands, and relatives, the fire service. And they included me. My son was not in the fire service, but that's the kind of kindness that went a long way, and how, we're a family that we look after each other. And ICC the same. My colleagues who drove all night, flew in from all over the country to be with me. That means a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing. And you hit it out of the park when you said family. Mm-hmm. We're all one big family. The codes, are something that we work on and we work together on. But at the end, I think that, as you just mentioned, don't make it personal, and we're all going to know each other, and we'll know each other really well. I've definitely developed a lot of friendships across the country with different folks that I never thought I would ever know in my life. I never thought, being a kid in high school, in the middle of the country, just outside of Omaha, I would be doing what I'm doing today. And so it's always amazing to see how this all brings us together.
Yeah, it's so true. You brought a name.
Well, Sarah,
you brought a name from the past, Alan Bernasini. I remember Alan very well. And actually, when the codes were adopted in Phoenix, Barbara Coffrin was his fire marshal, and he told her, "Vote your conscience." So
that's good. Yeah,
and that's a good leader. Trusted his fire marshal to do the right thing without telling her, "No, you've got to vote this way or vote." It was, so it's all these are. I'm sorry, my husband just got here. I have my dog now here. So, hello, Gus. Hello.
Well, so it just shows how we're all being flexible right now, and we're all working from home, right?
That's right. But at least you haven't seen anybody come behind me, which is.
That's okay. I had that happen on a few webinars that I'm sure I was on, where family, or I remember I was working from home and I had my mic on and I was getting after my kids. My son was trying to do DoorDash and he's 18 and the place was like 5 minutes away and he's trying to DoorDash McDonald's. And I said, "Are you serious?" And I'm criticizing him DoorDashing McDonald's that is 5 minutes away, and everybody that I'm on the webinar with and everybody that's in the meeting is hearing me talk to my son about his maybe poor choices in life about DoorDashing McDonald's. So
it's funny. You do see some interesting things. I've seen little paws come through the street. They're tapping their human friends, and it's funny. You have to, but I still do think it's business, and you should try to, make it as official and professional as possible. But it has gotten a little bit more relaxed, I think. That probably
absolutely. Well, with that, I'm going to bring our episode to a close. Sarah, I really do appreciate it. Thank you for joining us on this episode of ICC Region 1 Radio. I hope that everybody that listens to this podcast can share in that insight and those experiences, and that will help you as you continue to grow and develop as a code professional. As always, I want to thank you for listening to ICC Region 1 Radio. If you enjoy the show, make sure to subscribe. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podcasts. Also Spotify, we're on Spotify. You can actually watch this video of Sara and I on Spotify. So if you listen to it and want to go back, you can definitely check us out on Spotify and YouTube. We are on YouTube. And be sure to join us for any upcoming episodes that we have on ICC Region 1 Radio. Again, thank you.